This isn't your typical marketing software ad because HubSpot ain't typical. It's marketing made easy. Turn one piece of content into assets for every channel, convert leads in no time, and get a crystal clear view of your campaign performance. HubSpot can do all that and get you results fast, like double your leads in 12 months fast. Yeah. See, told you this wasn't your typical software ad. Visit HubSpot.com/marketers to get started for free.
Hey, good morning, everyone. It's Tuesday, February 25th. I'm Mark Dent, here with Rob Litterst, and this is the Hustle Daily Show. Today, we're talking about Panera. Its founder, Ken Rosenthal, died at the age of 81 last week. And though Rosenthal hasn't been involved with the company for a long time, we wanted to share his story and also delve into whether Panera can overcome some of its recent struggles after the chain has deviated from the plans of Rosenthal and others who helped bring it to prominence a generation ago. So, we're going to get to all of that, but before we do, let's give you the hits and headlines in business and tech. All right, I'm going to start off with some bad news before I get to some good news regarding jobs and things like that. So, the bad news first. Starbucks announced it's going to lay off 1,100 corporate workers as part of its strategy to reverse sales declines under CEO Brian Niccol. The world's largest coffee chain has also reduced its menu offerings by about 30%. That means there's no more olive oil drinks and no more cold energy drinks. And I assume we're going to see some more changes from Starbucks in the months ahead too. Okay, but for now though, on to the good news. Apple is expanding. The company announced it would hire 20,000 U.S. workers as it increases its domestic footprint in the next few years as part of a $500 billion investment. Part of those plans includes a server manufacturing facility in Houston. And if you guessed these changes were happening because of the potential tariffs with China, well, you're probably right. Okay, moving on. Is there a new Instagram? Yelp, an app where users share photos to private groups, has wrangled 2.2 million monthly active users, 40% of whom were reportedly still using the app 7 days after downloading it. And that's good in the app world, especially for something like a new Insta. Of course, several similar apps have petered out that seemed like they had momentum at one point, including Instagram's own Flipside and Be Real, which just became a joke pretty darn quickly. Rob, what do you think of Yelp?
You know, it's interesting. I thought Be Real was kind of like an interesting story. You know, the idea of kind of like having this app that was like anti-addiction, right? And like having people just come in like once a day at a specific time and not having the incentives aligned so that you stay in the app all day. I don't know. At this point, I feel like all of these social media platforms that are kind of like coming along are just destined to fade out, or they, you know, might have some unique functionality that might get bought by one of the bigger social media platforms. But honestly, like this app Yelp just sounds like something that you could do in a group text.
Like a Discord or something even.
Yeah, exactly. Like I just think that there's other forums where you can do that. I also think low key, the most intimate that you can be with somebody is to be on a shared Apple Photos album with them. That's where we have like our baby photos and stuff, and we share them with people in our family and like our closest friends. I think that's like a low key social network that's like hyper, like nearest and dearest friends. But yeah, I don't know. I'm not bullish on any of these social media apps that are kind of like going after the same turf as Instagram.
Yeah, I think the potential upside for it is that people have been getting tired of Instagram's Reels. It's not the same app that it was even, 6 or 7 years ago when you primarily used it to see photos from your friends. Now it's like videos from like strangers and influencers and celebrities who are showing up in people's feeds. And a lot of people don't like that. So I think if Yelp kind of sticks to what used to be Instagram's kind of lane, then maybe there's a chance. That said, it's just so hard for apps to be sticky.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Totally agree.
All right, on to the next story. Say it ain't so, Denny's. With egg prices up nearly 200% year over year this January, Denny's, known for its cheap prices, is adding an egg surcharge. Waffle House already did this. The mighty are falling everywhere, basically. Except potentially some good news about eggs for probably the first time since 2022 or something. And that's because turkey's eggs, not to be confused with turkey eggs, could help the U.S. solve its ongoing egg shortage. The Egg Producers Central Union in Turkey said that the country will export a record 420 million eggs to the U.S. this year. We will see if it actually leads to lower prices, though I am doubtful. All right, let's move on to the main story. As mentioned above, we're talking about Panera. Its founder, Ken Rosenthal, died last week at the age of 81. So we wanted to take a moment to discuss how Panera changed the game of casual dining, and in some ways invented it, and whether it can remain as strong in the future. All right, Rob, first off, can you tell me a little bit about how Rosenthal founded Panera?
Of course. So this is one of those cool stories because it just makes it seem like it's just so easy to build a massive business. So This guy was the co-owner of a women's apparel store in St. Louis in the 1980s. And he heard from a relative about the popularity of Le Boulanger, a sourdough bakery in California whose name I'm probably absolutely butchering.
It sounded good to me.
Thanks. Yeah, it's 7th grade French right there, just shining through. This guy hears about this bakery, and even though he can't cook anything, he asks the owner for advice and studies under him for a year. Later, he founds St. Louis Bread Company. Soon it gets bought out by Au Bon Pain and taken nationally under the name Panera. Today, Panera has 2,000 U.S. locations and ranks 11th in sales out of all fast food and fast casual restaurants. Pretty unbelievable rise for this guy who just kind of on a hunch decided to start a bakery.
Right. And he said, this was in a newspaper story, I think from the St. Louis Post-Dispatch back in the 90s. He ended up having a few St. Louis Bread Company locations before it ended up getting bought out, but he couldn't cook anything. This was not his thing at all, but he just went ahead with it. And it's really, I think, kind of a story of an understated kind of founder. And, when he did sell St. Louis Bread Company to Au Bon Pain, he went ahead and became a franchisee. So he continued to kind of stay in the business, but he never had the huge role after that. And he said that that's because he was more suited to it. I think he put it as I'm more of a pioneer than someone who just wants to run things. So I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
And of course, the interesting thing about Panera and St. Louis Bread Company in the late 90s, early 2000s is that it more or less invented the concept of fast casual. Probably along with Chipotle, I think those were probably two of the most influential players.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point because I hadn't even really thought about that, but you're totally right. I mean, I grew up in a town in New Hampshire outside Manchester called Bedford, and we got a Panera a couple of years into me moving there, and it very quickly became this hot spot in town. And it was honestly one of the most popular restaurants in town that people would just go in and out of at least a couple times a week. Mm-hmm. And I remember going to Panera and getting bagels. I remember going to Panera and getting the bacon turkey Bravo, my favorite sandwich on the menu for years. I've spent a lot of time in Panera. And now that you say that, it was kind of one of the first fast casual places. You got one of those little chips where it would buzz when your food was ready. And it usually took under 5 minutes for your food to be cooked. So yeah, not quite fast food, but you also didn't have to wait for a long time. So it was right in that kind of healthy middle, which I think is a place where a lot of restaurants tried to get to over the last decade or two.
For sure. And the other thing about Panera is that it kind of pioneered a few concepts of just being this community kind of third place, frankly, even before Starbucks was.
Yep.
And I don't go to Panera all that often anymore. The last time I was there, though, I remember it was just a Friday afternoon, and there was a group of women who, some were wearing business suits, others casual clothing. I don't remember if it was a book club or what it was, but it just seemed like so many different walks of life were coming into Panera to sit at this table in the suburbs. And
so
and
cool.
I think that is kind of Panera at its essence.
Absolutely.
I mean, now that said, Panera's not been doing all that well lately. We think of, fast food restaurants in particular last year. It did very poorly, as did, sit down kind of casual restaurants like Red Lobster, for instance. But Panera has kind of gone away from what it did in terms of its healthy offerings. A lot of customers say that they're changing the recipes, not making them as healthy. They're angry about, heightened prices as well. So I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on Panera right now as it is and whether it can kind of correct the course?
Yeah. I mean, I can't really comment too much on the portion sizes, just having not been there in a while. But one thing that I used to like about Panera is they did a bunch of different things like pretty well, right? Like you could get pretty good coffee, you could get a pretty good sandwich, you get a pretty good bagel. The challenge is, I think, in the world of restaurants, like we've moved really towards specialties. I think a lot of the most popular places are places that just master one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like coffee, I think people have realized is one of the most lucrative food businesses that you can possibly have if you do it right. And it's very hard to do it right and actually compete with like the Dunkins and Starbucks of the world just with economies of scale. But there are obviously a ton of places that just do coffee. Most towns have a bagel spot, and most towns have a few delis that have good sandwiches, right? And so I think like when you put that equation together, like they're all kind of picking at Panera. And I think you've seen this across like other types of franchises. You talk about like the TGI Fridays, the Chili's, like all of these bigger family restaurants that just do like a bunch of things okay. They don't do anything like extremely well. Haven't really done too well over the last couple of decades, just because I think of like trends towards healthy food and trends towards specialization in restaurants.
Yeah, I mean, it's a new generation. You got to do new things, I feel like. So every kind of long-time chain restaurant, I think, is in some ways kind of suffering from the same sort of malaise there you just suggested.
Yeah.
All right, but that's going to do it for us today. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the Hustle Daily Show. We're a proud part of the HubSpot Podcast Network. Our editor today is Robert Hartwig, and our executive producer is Darren Clark. We've got a lot more tech and business coverage in our newsletter, so if you're not subscribed, please go get signed up at thehustle.co/email and check us out on Instagram at thehustledaily. We'll see you tomorrow.